Imagine this, Christmas Eve, the whole house glowing with lights and the smell of cookies in the air, when my parents suddenly tell me I'm suspended from school. Just like that. No warning. No explanation. Except there was one condition: I had to apologize to my sister, Cassie, for something I didn't do. My heart sank. I couldn't believe this was happening. Cassie, their golden child, had done nothing wrong. But in our family, she was always perfect, always right. And I was the one blamed for everything. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I felt trapped. Suspended from school on Christmas Eve? Alone in my room, listening to laughter and carols downstairs, I realized my parents had chosen sides long ago. I didn't know what to do, but one thing was clear: I wasn't going to apologize for a lie. Not this time. Richard and Marla, my parents, were firm. They thought an apology would fix everything, and maybe it would make Cassie happy. But I knew it wouldn't. I had to decide: submit to their rules and lose my dignity, or stand my ground and face their anger. That night, I started thinking about every unfair rule, every blame that wasn't mine, every time I was overshadowed by Cassie. I realized I couldn't stay silent forever. I needed to find a way to prove the truth. And I had a plan forming in my mind. A way to finally show my parents that I wasn't the problem. Living in our house felt like walking on a tightrope. Cassie, my sister, was always praised for the smallest achievements. A perfect grade, a compliment from a teacher, even a simple chore done correctly, she was applauded non-stop. And me? I was the shadow she left behind. Every mistake, even the tiniest one, was magnified. A spilled cup of milk, a late homework assignment, a forgotten chore, my parents never missed a chance to remind me how I fell short compared to her. Dinner conversations were the hardest. Every accomplishment of hers was celebrated, while my efforts went unnoticed. I remember trying to share something I worked hard on, only to be cut off by a "Cassie did that better." Birthday presents, school awards, even casual remarks were all reminders that I was never enough. I started questioning myself constantly. Was I clumsy? Careless? Or was it just that no matter what I did, it would never measure up? Even in small things, favoritism was clear. My opinions were dismissed, my ideas ignored, and my emotions brushed aside. Yet Cassie's complaints, no matter how trivial, were heard immediately. If she was upset, the house shifted. Everyone rushed to fix her problems, while mine were treated like nuisances. It was exhausting living under a microscope where every flaw of mine was amplified, and every success of hers was celebrated. I wanted to speak up, to demand fairness, but it felt pointless. The pattern was deeply rooted, and I was stuck in a system that valued her over me. Every day, the unfairness ate at me, fueling a mix of anger and sadness. And in that quiet frustration, I started thinking about how I could finally change the way things were, and make them see me for who I truly was. That Christmas Eve was supposed to be joyful, filled with laughter and warmth. But instead, it turned into a nightmare. I was in the living room helping set the table when my parents suddenly turned on me. Richard's voice was sharp, Marla's cold. They accused me of embarrassing Cassie in front of our relatives, claiming I had made her look foolish during dinner preparations. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I hadn't done anything wrong. Nothing I did was meant to hurt her. I tried to explain, to defend myself, but my words fell on deaf ears. They wouldn't listen. Cassie sat there silently, smirking ever so slightly, knowing the power she held. And then came the ultimatum. My parents said I had two choices: apologize to her immediately or face severe consequences. My schooling, everything I worked for, would be paused. Suspended. On Christmas Eve. The words hit me like a punch. I felt my chest tighten, my throat burn, and my stomach twist. This wasn't just unfair, it was crushing. The entire room seemed to shrink around me. Relatives whispered quietly, glancing between us, but no one stepped in. I was completely alone. My parents expected me to kneel, to admit fault for something I didn't do, all for the sake of keeping peace in a house that already felt suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, to disappear, but I stayed silent. Anger, hurt, and disbelief churned inside me. How could they believe her over me so easily? How could my own parents demand this kind of submission on what was supposed to be a night of joy? That moment broke something inside me, but it also sparked a determination. I wouldn't let this define me. I knew I had to find a way to turn this betrayal into my strength. I ran to my room and slammed the door, the sound echoing like a warning. I collapsed onto my bed, hiding my face in the blankets, letting the tears flow freely. The weight of what had just happened pressed down on me like a heavy stone. How could my parents punish me for something I didn't do? How could they blindly believe Cassie, again? The unfairness of it all left me numb, yet trembling inside. I curled into a tight ball, wishing I could vanish, wishing I could wake up from this nightmare. The laughter and chatter downstairs felt like a cruel reminder that life continued outside my little bubble of despair. My heart ached not just for the accusation, but for the pattern that had always existed. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how careful I was, the blame always found me. Why does everything always fall on me? I whispered to the empty room, my voice barely audible over my sobs. I thought about every moment where I had been overshadowed, every time my effort was ignored, every time Cassie's small victories were celebrated while mine were dismissed. It wasn't just this incident, it was a lifetime of favoritism, a constant reminder that I was the second choice. The room felt colder than usual, the silence wrapping around me like a cage. I wanted to scream, to tell someone, anyone, that this wasn't fair, but I felt powerless. Isolation wasn't just physical, it had seeped into my mind. Alone in my thoughts, I began to understand the depth of my parents' bias and the way it had shaped me. And in that quiet despair, a tiny spark started to grow, a need to reclaim my voice, my worth, and my life. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I wiped my tears and made a decision. I wouldn't apologize for something I hadn't done. Not this time. I realized that submitting would only make me smaller, and I was tired of being overlooked and blamed. Something had to change, and if my parents couldn't see the truth, I would make it impossible to ignore. I grabbed a notebook from my desk and started writing. Every unfair moment I could remember went onto those pages. Each instance of favoritism, each lie Cassie whispered to shift blame, every time I was punished for something trivial, it all went down in black and white. I wrote the dates, the words exchanged, even the reactions from my parents. Slowly, the jumble of hurt in my mind transformed into something organized, something tangible. The act of writing made me feel powerful in a way I hadn't before. I wasn't just venting, I was collecting proof. Silent but deliberate, I began noticing patterns. Every time Cassie complained, my parents reacted immediately. Every time I tried to stand up for myself, my voice was dismissed. I started tracking these moments in detail, labeling them, connecting them. It was quiet work, but it felt like building a shield around myself. I wasn't powerless anymore, I was preparing. Each note, each careful observation, strengthened my resolve. I wasn't planning to hurt anyone recklessly, I wanted them to see the truth, the unfairness, and finally recognize me for who I really was. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of control. Anger had transformed into strategy, and in that moment, I knew my silence wasn't weakness, it was the beginning of my plan. A plan that would make them pay attention and, eventually, respect me. The next day at school, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. Cassie had claimed credit for a project I had spent hours perfecting. My heart raced as I watched her smile, unaware of the truth. Normally, I might have stayed silent, letting her victory go unnoticed. But something inside me had shifted. I wasn't willing to let her take what was mine this time. I approached my teacher quietly after class and explained the situation, showing the work I had done. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. The teacher nodded, carefully reviewing my evidence. There was no argument, the credit was rightfully returned to me. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. For the first time, I realized that standing up for myself didn't have to cause a scene or anger my parents, it could be done with thought and precision. That afternoon, as I walked home, a small smile tugged at my lips. The power I had felt from writing down the unfairness at home had taken its first visible shape. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was acting with intention. Every little correction, every moment I subtly exposed her misdeeds, added a piece to the control I had been missing for so long. It wasn't just about a project or recognition, it was about proving to myself that I mattered. That I could reclaim small pieces of my life from the shadow Cassie had cast over me. And in that quiet triumph, I felt a thrill I hadn't known before. This was just the beginning. My patience, my strategy, and my careful planning would eventually lead to something much larger. Something that would make everyone, including my parents, finally see me for who I truly was. A few days later, I stumbled upon something that made my chest tighten. While reviewing my graded assignments, I noticed inconsistencies. My scores were lower than they should have been. At first, I thought it was a mistake. But then I overheard Cassie whispering to one of our relatives, twisting my words, painting me as careless and irresponsible. The pieces fell into place. She had been deliberately sabotaging my grades and manipulating my parents with lies. The realization hit me like a storm. Betrayal had always lurked in the background of my life, but this felt different. This was intentional. Deliberate. Every unfair moment at home suddenly had a new meaning. Every punishment, every comparison, every small dismissal, maybe some of it had been fueled by her schemes. My heart ached, but more than that, it burned with disbelief. How could someone so close, someone who shared my home, act with such cruelty? I felt my world shift. The comfort I had tried to find in small victories vanished, replaced with a raw mix of hurt and anger. Tears welled up, but I refused to let them fall. This betrayal was deep, but I knew reacting in panic would only play into her hands. My parents were still blind, still trusting her words over mine. Losing my temper now would change nothing. Instead, I retreated into my resolve. I would watch carefully. I would gather proof. Patience became my weapon, strategy my shield. Every move I made from this point on had to be calculated. I couldn't let this go unnoticed, but I also couldn't let emotion rule me. Deep down, I knew that enduring this betrayal with a clear mind would be far more powerful than any immediate reaction. I would rise above it, and one day, they would see the truth. I realized I couldn't face this alone. The weight of Cassie's lies and my parents' blind trust made me feel small, powerless. I needed someone who could see the truth, someone who wouldn't judge me or dismiss my feelings. That's when I turned to Mr. Holt, my history teacher. He had always been fair and kind, noticing when something was off. After class, I asked to speak with him privately. I explained the situation carefully, not wanting to sound like I was complaining, but simply sharing the facts. He listened, his expression serious but calm. He didn't interrupt or judge me. Instead, he asked questions that helped me clarify the events in my mind. For the first time, someone outside my family understood how deeply unfair everything had been. Next, I reached out to Milo, a friend I trusted completely. Milo had a sharp mind and a level head, and he always encouraged me to think before acting. I explained what was happening with Cassie and how my parents were being manipulated. Milo didn't laugh or shrug it off. He reminded me that speaking up didn't make me a troublemaker, it made me brave. He said I had every right to defend myself and that my voice mattered. Talking to them gave me a spark of hope. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. I was justified, and I could take steps to protect myself and prove the truth. They offered advice on how to handle the situation carefully, reminding me that patience and strategy could be more powerful than anger. For the first time in months, I felt less trapped. I realized that support existed, and with it, I could start turning my fear into quiet determination. By now, I knew that reacting impulsively would only make things worse. I needed a strategy, a careful approach that would reveal the truth without starting another argument. I began to map out a plan in my head. every detail mattered. Every small incident could be used to show the pattern of manipulation that Cassie had woven around our parents. I started keeping a journal, noting the times Cassie took credit for my work, exaggerated problems to gain sympathy, or twisted facts to make me appear at fault. I tracked tests, assignments, and even simple chores, recording the moments when she misrepresented the truth. Each entry became a piece of the puzzle, a silent record that would speak louder than my protests. At school, I made sure to quietly save copies of projects, tests, and graded work. At home, I observed carefully, paying attention to how Cassie acted around our parents and noting every lie she told. I didn't tell anyone about my plan. It had to remain secret. Every glance, every small gesture I recorded, every inconsistency I noted, added to the evidence I was building. The tension in the house grew. I moved carefully, like a chess player planning moves several steps ahead. My parents remained unaware of my silent operation, and Cassie didn't suspect that her carefully constructed image could crumble. With each documented detail, my confidence grew. I wasn't helpless anymore. This wasn't just about proving her wrong, it was about reclaiming my voice, restoring fairness, and finally showing my parents the truth. The plan was taking shape, precise and deliberate. Soon, everything would change, and the house that had felt suffocating for years would no longer hold the same power over me. That evening, my parents found another reason to scold me. It wasn't real, they twisted a small mistake into a serious offense, blaming me for carelessness that never existed. Their words cut deeper than usual, sharp and unfair, echoing all the times I had been blamed for things that weren't my fault. I felt the familiar mix of anger and helplessness rise, but this time it didn't paralyze me. I sank into my chair, shaking with frustration, staring at the floor as the unfairness of it all pressed on my chest. For years, I had carried the weight of blame, the silent burden of being the problem child while Cassie was treated like the golden one. I thought about every time my voice was ignored, every punishment that wasn't mine, every injustice that had been shoved aside as if I didn't matter. Then, a thought crystallized in my mind, clear and fierce: I'm done being the scapegoat. It wasn't just a fleeting feeling, it was a turning point. I realized that nothing would change if I continued to stay quiet, if I allowed them to control how I was perceived. Anger transformed into determination. Betrayal no longer left me broken, it became fuel. Every unfair word, every manipulated accusation, every lie Cassie had told, it all became part of the fire that now burned inside me. I made a silent promise to myself: I would no longer let them define my worth. I would act, carefully and deliberately, to expose the truth and reclaim my voice. The powerless girl who had cried alone in her room was gone. In her place stood someone ready to fight, someone who would turn betrayal into strength. For the first time, I felt unstoppable. The day finally came. I had collected enough proof, enough notes, copies, and records to leave no doubt about Cassie's schemes. My heart pounded, but I forced myself to stay calm. There was no yelling, no dramatic confrontation. I wanted the truth to speak for itself. I began by showing my parents the clear timeline of incidents, carefully organized. Each note, each example of misrepresented assignments, every small lie Cassie had told, was laid out plainly. I included the copies of my work that she had claimed, the discrepancies in grades, and the events she had twisted to make me appear irresponsible. I spoke steadily, pointing to evidence rather than accusing. My parents' faces shifted from impatience to confusion, then to shock. Next, I presented my teacher, Mr. Holt, who confirmed the authenticity of my work and backed up my account. His calm authority made it impossible for my parents to dismiss me. Milo, my friend, helped me show how some of Cassie's manipulations had extended beyond our home, providing an outside perspective that further reinforced the truth. Cassie sat frozen, her confident mask slipping. She opened her mouth to argue, but every claim she made was contradicted by the evidence in front of everyone. My parents could no longer ignore what had been hidden in plain sight. I stayed composed throughout, letting the facts carry the weight. There was no shouting, no tears, just undeniable proof. Slowly, my parents began to realize how deeply I had been wronged. The tension in the room lifted slightly as the truth finally emerged, exposing the favoritism, lies, and manipulation. For the first time in years, I felt a sense of justice. I hadn't needed to fight with anger, I had let the truth shine. And in that quiet victory, the house that had always felt suffocating seemed to shift, even if just a little, in my favor. After seeing all the evidence, my parents sat in stunned silence. Richard's jaw tightened, and Marla's hands trembled slightly as they scanned the notes, the records, and the confirmations from my teacher and Milo. For the first time, they couldn't dismiss my words as exaggeration or misbehavior. The truth was undeniable, and it forced them to confront the choices they had made for years. I spoke calmly but firmly, letting them know I would not apologize for what I hadn't done. I outlined the countless times I had been blamed unfairly, the favoritism that had shaped our home, and the lies Cassie had told to manipulate their perception. There was no pleading, no anger, only honesty and resolve. They looked at Cassie differently now. The carefully maintained image of perfection she had relied on began to crack. Small hesitations appeared in her expressions, a nervous glance, a faltering tone when she tried to speak. The power she had wielded for so long started slipping, and I felt a quiet satisfaction. I also made it clear that boundaries were necessary. I wouldn't allow unfair treatment to continue, and my school privileges, which had been threatened so many times, were reinstated without argument. It felt like reclaiming pieces of myself that had been held hostage for years. The atmosphere shifted. My parents began to recognize the imbalance, the way their favoritism had affected both of us. I finally felt seen, acknowledged, and respected. The relief that washed over me was profound. It wasn't just about school or recognition, it was about validation. For the first time in my life, my voice mattered, and I could stand tall in my own home without fear of being silenced or dismissed. Sitting alone in my room that night, I thought back on everything that had happened. The years of favoritism, the constant comparisons, the unfair punishments, and Cassie's manipulations all came rushing through my mind. Each memory carried a sting, but also a lesson. I realized how much I had endured silently, how many times I had doubted myself, and how often I had felt invisible in my own home. Yet, through all the pain, something remarkable had changed. I had learned to trust my own judgment, to gather strength from within, and to approach injustice with patience and clarity. The experience had forced me to grow, to see the difference between reaction and strategy, between being powerless and taking control. I had discovered a quiet resilience I didn't know existed. Now, my parents and even Cassie had seen the truth. The dynamics that had once made me feel trapped had shifted. I had set boundaries, claimed my voice, and reclaimed the respect that had been denied to me for so long. The house felt different, not perfect, but lighter, as if the air itself acknowledged the change. Reflecting on everything, I understood that my journey wasn't just about exposing lies or correcting injustices. It was about realizing my own worth and standing firm in the face of adversity. I had turned betrayal into empowerment and unfairness into a lesson in strength. And in that moment of quiet reflection, I whispered to myself, knowing it applied to anyone facing similar challenges, I learned that sometimes standing up for yourself is the greatest gift you can give, even on Christmas Eve. Do you think I did the right thing by standing up to my parents, or should I have stayed silent to keep peace? I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Subscribe and hit the bell for more stories like this.